Hey everybody, this is Kim from Read It Again Bookstore, and today I am with Jenny Bott and Chaya Bhuvaneswar, and we're here to talk about Jenny's book, Each of Us Killers. Did I get that right? I'm reading it off. This is such a cute cover too. You posted on your Facebook page how your cover was made. I think I watched that thing like 3 times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The time-lapse video.
Yes, that was so cool. And you posted several videos or several discussions about the cover. And I think at one point you apologized, but I was like, no, I'm loving it. Okay, let me introduce you guys and then we'll get right to it. Jenny Bott is a writer, literary translator, and literary critic. She is the host of Desi book podcast, which I have a link I'm going to stick in the comments in a minute. Her short story collection, Each of Us Killers, will be out. Well, it's out. And her literary translation of, can you fill in the blank?
Dumketu.
Short story writer. Best short story fiction will be out in late 2020. Her writing has appeared or is forthcoming in various venues in the US and UK, India, including NPR, Washington Post, Electric Literature, The Atlantic, BBC Culture, Literary Hub, Long Reads, The Millions, Pop Matters, and the others. She's been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, the 2017 Best American Short Story. She was a finalist for the 2017 Best Net Anthology, having lived and worked her way around India, England, Germany, and Scotland, and various parts of the U.S. Now she lives in a suburb of Dallas. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you.
Okay.
Exciting.
Okay.
So,
no, wait. I have to introduce you too, Chaya.
I was going to ask her some questions.
Wait. Okay, so you're a physician, you're a writer. I'll keep it short. You work in Narrative Magazine, Tin House, Electric Lit, The Millions, Jalen, Michigan Quarterly Review, and elsewhere. She's author of White Dancing Elephant Stories, finalist for the 2019 PEN, the Brigham Prize for debut fiction. Her poetry and prose, I can never pronounce that word, has to do with Hindu epics and other myths and histories, and the survival of sexual assault and racialized sexual violence by diverse women of color. That is an amazing sentence, and I'm sorry, I flubbed it. Anyway, welcome, guys. Ask away.
Thank you so much for having us. So I want to spotlight Jenny's debut collection, and my hope is after a few questions, we're going to have Jenny read for us from the collection. And so I want to kind of start it. I've read a little bit in past interviews, but maybe you can recap for new readers how you came to fiction writing, the connections you see between past work you've done, particularly I think in Silicon Valley or in the corporate world, and your keen and telling observations as a fiction writer and your capacity for that.
Thank you, Chaya, and thank you, Kim, for having us. I know these are difficult times for bookstores, and I just appreciate everything that independent bookstores are doing to help writers like us. So I really, thank you very much. And folks, if who are watching either right now or even after this recording, please do place orders online with bookstores like Read It Again, because that's how we keep elevating our literary traditions, in the independent bookstores. So coming to your question, Chaya, thank you for that. Yeah, so my journey to fiction writing, I'll keep it short because you're right, I have talked about it in interviews and even a long reads essay. And what I've been working as an engineer and then in marketing and management consulting and in Silicon Valley for years and years. But I had always been taking writing workshops during my weekends, vacation, etc. I'd go to Iowa or I'd take it at Western Michigan or in California. And so I was always doing that. And so my fiction writing happened primarily at the time when I was working full time. It happened for those workshops, how they ask for samples. So I would do those. I never had the courage, though, even though I would get feedback in those classes, never had the confidence to actually submit to literary magazines. I only started to do that after I left my full-time job, because I just thought I had turned 40. I'd, gone past that hill and thought, if I don't do it now, if I don't bite the bullet, when am I going to do it? So I started, to dust off some old stories, some new stories, and started to send them out to literary magazines. And that's really what I did primarily from 2014, late 2014, till about 2017 with the stories in this collection. I was writing them and I was sending them to literary magazines and getting rejections as well as acceptances. And so that gave me the confidence to eventually think, oh, I've got enough here for a book, maybe because these editors at these magazines thought they were good enough. People, when they read them, thought they were good enough. So maybe there's something I can try and put together. So it was a later in life sort of publication journey, but of course the writing had been going on before that. And then to your second part of the question about, work and Silicon Valley. So when I left my job, having worked full time for a long time, work was a big preoccupation for me because it was so much a part of my identity that when I left, you suddenly feel bereft. You're like, okay, how do I introduce myself? I was single, I wasn't a mother or a wife. And so people ask you, right, what do you do? And I wasn't ready to call myself a writer yet. And so I didn't, and so work became this big obsession with me. I started to think about how much work means to us. I mean, and you're a full-time physician and a writer. And so I'm sure you know about this more than us because, work is not just, it's not just like a compartment, we don't go 8 to 5 and then shut things off. It's so much a part of our lives. It's so much a part of who we are and our identity. So I think with that being a preoccupation, I didn't initially set out to write, I didn't have a strategy, I'm going to write a collection about working lives, but almost every story that I wrote in that time period, while I was trying to figure out my own identity without that work label, ended up being about people at work. That was my way into the story. What do they do? That was my way into their character and story.
Well, I want to pick up several threads there. The first thread is, that they could be good enough and so on. I want to highlight to our audience that they most certainly are brilliant, more than good enough stories, so much so that Lori Muchnick at Kirkus Reviews included Jenny's collection among highly anticipated story collections for this fall. So I just want to reiterate, to our wonderful audience, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and please support your bookstore that's sponsoring this by ordering Jenny's collection online. Very easy to do. You can also always order through bookshop.org, and so on. And then I want to frame my next question just a little bit. I'm going to say that indeed, I would argue that more writers work in some capacity outside of writing than not, and many of them work pretty significant hours and for really strong personal motivations. I want to name Charles Yu, this wonderful literary / sci-fi writer whose book is actually National Book Award longlisted this year, but who practiced law full time for decades before he quit to write. And then I want to also name C-Pan Zhang,
yes.
Who works for a skincare company, actually. I was surprised to read that. So given the ubiquity of work, and then on the other hand, these signals that you're talking about from the literary community of sort of how do you describe yourself, and you've written very movingly about being a non-standard starter, you're meaning not 21 and in an MFA or something like that. Which story would you point to, if any, or which acceptance or which milestone helped you understand that you really have quite a lot of talent as a writer, and that this was really worth pursuing? Is there a particular story in the collection that has that meaning to you?
There is a story. It didn't make it into the collection though, but it is out there for people to go get. And what happened was I think late 2016, I'd had a few stories published, but then there was, all of a sudden there was this kind of spate of rejections, and I began to kind of second guess myself and doubt myself and think, did I do the right thing? I gave up my job and everything, and I'm doing this, and now, these stories can't be any good because I'm getting these rejections. And then there was this one story called The Golden Amulet about a couple in Silicon Valley. And it's not really to do with work explicitly, but I got a call from Morgan Parker. She's an editor. Well, she was at the time an editor at Amazon's Day One, where they published long short stories, I guess. And this one was a longer one. And she actually, first she said, I'm interested in publishing this one, but I want to talk about it. And I said, okay, great. And so we talked on the phone, and she asked me some very insightful questions about the story. And I thought, wow, she really is interested. I hadn't had that with any other editor. We'd had some email exchanges with other published stories, but this was an editor who really had taken the time to read it and had questions for me. And then after the call, she emails me and she says, well, I'd love to publish it. And Chaya, you're not going to believe this. I'm just going to say it out loud now. But she said, I want to pay you $2,000 for this one story.
That's awesome.
I know. I mean, I had never been paid that much for one short story.
That's amazing. Right? That's fantastic.
I know. And she said, yeah. And she said, it's like this Day One, we'll publish it as a Kindle. It's part of Amazon and all that. And we'll do an interview with you. There will be an illustration for your story. And we're going to have a copy editor go over this with you. And I'm like, I'd never done anything like that. And so then, they had this illustrator read the story and create an illustration just for my story. There was an interview, and then the copy editor, who was not Indian, but did her homework so well that she checked every Indian spelling, every Indian word, And when that happened, when somebody invests so much time and money and effort into one of your, works, I mean, that gives you confidence, right? You think, okay, maybe I'm not, silly, and maybe I am on the right track, that maybe my work does mean something, So that was, for me, that was the turning point. It was December 2016, I remember. It was just, yeah.
That's a wonderful story. And I hope everyone who hears that story gets inspired right now, go write, go revise, go write. But you bring up money. And there have been more and more discussions of money in publishing, the recent disclosure, for example, of disparities in publishing. Like everyone, I was really shocked that Jesmyn Ward, for example, didn't get a huge advance, right? I mean,
after her National Book Award.
Right.
Oh
right.
My God.
And so all of that. But then on the good side of it, hearing some really good news in the last couple of months for many writers of color. So I'm just wondering, what's your take now? I think this is the last question I'll ask, and then we'll have you read, if that's okay. Yeah, being on book tour, actually having your book not only be out in the world, but visibly recognized, praised by people whose opinion really is like Morgan's, really worth having, really valuable. How do you feel now about disparities and what you've called ageism in publishing, other issues? Just if you want to give a take on that and orient it toward people watching who are writers or want to be writers and what they can think about all of it. And then you can end by telling us what part you're going to read from, so people who have the book can hopefully follow along.
Great, I will do that. So yeah, I mean, I think that I have spoken about ageism issues, at least the way I perceive them before, and written about them. I think it's definitely getting better. Like you said, the publishing paid me hashtag that LL McKinney started on Twitter, which is how all these disparities came to light. certainly awareness and visibility is key to kind of make improvements. I think I still believe that there is a preferred mold. You know, if you're a youngish writer and you write this big novel about love and sex, let's say, that is definitely going to be more commercially viable, let's say, than, you know, a short story collection like yours or mine. That said, you and I mean, you particularly, you won awards for White Dancing Elephants. And it was, my God, it was like the short story collection of the year when it came out. So that gave me courage just to see that. And that, because, you know, you wrote about non-white characters and you wrote about these, you know, women of color and women of Indian origin. And that certainly, I would say that when people see, and this is one of the reasons I think I have been doing my book tour with other writers of color. I have intentionally reached out to writers of color for my blurbs, mostly. I have some who are not, but I have intentionally been doing this because I want this to look normal. I want to normalize this. I want the people who are interested in my book or come to an event like this to see, yes, it is possible for two women writers like us, who sound like us, who look like us, who write like us, to have some commercial success with our books. It's possible. So I do think you're right that it is getting better. There's still work to be done, but it's getting better.
And what are you going to read for us, Jenny?
Okay, yes, I will read. So, I'm thinking of reading from this, you know, since we talk about ageism, there is a story in the collection called Lifespring. And this story is about, it's about a woman who had an abusive marriage in Silicon Valley, and she left her husband and went back to India to make a fresh start as a baker. And so, yeah, I think I'll just do that much setting of the scene, and I'll just start and I'll read just a couple pages. The day I first met Charlie, he showed up unannounced before 9 a.m. No text or call or pre-scheduled pickup. Hulking in my doorway, he dripped from the morning downpour, and a large puddle of dirty water collected under his feet. How could someone walk about in Mumbai monsoons without an umbrella or raincoat? It was the year I had finally decided that baking, much like life itself, did not have to be a prescribed science. Till then, for a couple years since my divorce, I had been making box loads of the standard varieties of chocolate chip, oatmeal and raisin, and peanut butter cookies that my customers expected and enjoyed. True, baking is all about the chemical reaction between carefully measured and skillfully blended ingredients with the right temperature applied as catalyst. Also, for me, the control and predictability of working with well-tested recipes had always been relaxing and meditative. Somehow, though, adding the odd surprise substance into the mix and yet managing a decent end result gave me a new and more intense pleasure. My first experiment was a simple customization of the traditional naan kadai from my hometown Surat. A secret. I dry roasted the suji to a pale pink hue before adding it to the flour. My recipe yielded an American-sized, soft and crumbly version encrusted with pistachios and aromatic with saffron, cardamom, and nutmeg. To date, it is the most demanded cookie by commercial and private customers alike. This was the batch Charlie was collecting when I mistook him for one of the peons Audrey sent for pickup. Before I could finish speaking, he corrected me sharply. I'm Audrey's brother, Charlie. Prasad's basti is flooded today. Are the boxes ready or not? Well, no, I wanted to tell him. My pickup time is always after 12 p.m. Here I was, in my nightclothes, and barely finished with breakfast, while this rude man boy with a wet animal smell ruined my doormat. Lacking the energy to argue, I let his rudeness pass. I need 10 minutes to pack. You're early. He shook his head, rolled his eyes, folded his arms, and leaned against the doorframe, all of which I took as further signs of disrespect. Across the hallway, Madhu's flat door opened for Nayana, the maid. Both women stared at the young man, and beyond him, at me, in my thin, faded kurta with no bra underneath. Hi, Hina, Madhu's voice resonated through the empty space. I want Nayana to do my fans also today, so she'll be late coming to you. Madhu took such liberties often. If the situation had been reversed, she would not have hesitated in telling me I was inconveniencing her, and that too without prior notice. I gave in as usual, without a word. Hurrying with the packaging, I called from the kitchen. Have you brought anything for waterproofing? You don't have that in the packing materials we send? The peon usually brings big plastic bags so they can be reused. No reply. I found a few large grocery bags under the sink to make do. Then I carried the boxes to him and placed them on the floor. 5 boxes, 500 cookies. I'll get the book. 500? I thought we were doing 1,000. As he asked this, he opened one of the boxes, ripped open a paper pack, picked out a nankadai, and bit into it. I showed him the book. 500 per batch since last month. Ask Audrey. I'm happy to do batches of 1,000 each. She said they're not selling well during this season. People want hot fried snacks instead. He signed where I pointed and, mouth still full, said, Fine, I'll talk to her. So payment is 5 rupees per cookie, right? 7 per cookie, I corrected him. Now. The rate changed a few months ago because of the cost increase for pistachios and cashews. He frowned, crumbs stuck to his wet chin. I didn't know that. We haven't changed any of our prices. Why don't you call Audrey if you don't trust me? His gaze, resting several inches below my face, heated up both my temper and my skin under the kurta. Did I say I don't trust you? He lifted the boxes. You both have changed arrangements and no one has bothered to tell me, as if I am the peon. Was it my job to keep brother and sister informed of each other's doings in their business? But I did not say this out loud. As he waited by the lift, I got a wet mop and started on the puddle he had left behind. My arms moved so rapidly and fiercely they ached. His barking laugh made me glance up. Against his skin, his teeth glinted white as sugar, and his eyes shone. If I was still standing there, you would have mopped me up and squeezed me out into that bucket too. I paused and could not resist smiling back. Change into some dry clothes or you'll catch a cold. Yes, Madam G, he winked, stepping into the lift. As the doors closed, I shook the mop threateningly, and he laughed again, a less unpleasant sound.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
Well, that was just a very benign, it's Friday evening. I didn't want to get into something too serious.
There are many more confrontational
yes. Yeah.
stories. So we can, I guess wanted, we talked about my possibly reading a little bit also, but before
Yes.
we go there, I did just want to open it to you to just any other observations you wanted to make about the process of writing and publishing this collection, or the process of revising it. What was it like to go back and forth with your editor at 713? And just anything that you wanted to bring forward, because I feel like often there's not that much of a chance to talk about process at these events.
Yeah. No, that's a great question, because at 713 Books, I worked with Leland Chuk and Hasantika Sirasena, and my experience with them has just been terrific. I mean, I could not say nicer things about them. I think they're both terrific individuals. They are both writers, so they understand how important it is to get the editing done well. And I mean, they just treated me very well and gave me all the support and answered all my questions and treated my book very sensitively for the subject matter. There was never a question of, let's water this down, or can you put a bit more of that, some more of that in so that we can make it more commercially interesting. There was never a question when I went with the cover that I did with all the brown people on the cover. So these are important things when we're choosing publishers for our books, right? Is to be with people you can trust and people who will not will take your work and do it justice. So I'm very, very grateful to them. And I know you also were with a small press, although Zank Books is bigger than 713 in many ways. But what was your first book experience with, when you came out in 2018 with your book collection?
I think maybe it's worth speaking a little bit now to people thinking about entering various contests, because I think there's a specific experience associated with sending in your book to a contest, and submitting to a couple of contests, or, just kind of, I think the nicest thing about it is, at least for me, often we submit to these things without any expectation of actually being published through this process, so it's always a really nice surprise. But I do think some really lovely books have come out of similar contests. I would say there's a collection from the Iowa fiction contest that's similar by Thisbe Nissen called Out of the Girls' Room and Into the Night. That's a beautiful collection from several years ago. And there's another collection. There's actually quite a few. There's one, Emily Geminder has also won the Zank Prize, and Laura Vandenberg early on, published with Zank, What the World Will Look Like When All the Water Leaves Us. So I think it's just a positive to get that recognition when you're selected from a bunch of different people. On the other hand, I think there is a reflection point at that point, which I invite people to take, that if you get to be a finalist in such a competition, you have a window to seriously consider submitting to a larger publisher at that point. You can accept the finalist honor and go and submit. And so that may be something to consider too. Like you're not as locked in as one might think by submitting to these contests. So I would say there are always pluses and minuses of publishing with an indie, but what I really did like about it, like you're saying, is I didn't feel any pressure to select commercially more oriented stories, or stories that, like, no one said your stories each have to have a white protagonist or something like that, which I think that I remember reading Interpreter of Maladies, when that first came out, and realizing that as lovely and incredibly accomplished as that collection is by Jhumpa Lahiri, there's almost always a white point of view somewhere in the story. Yeah. There's almost always some vantage point of a white character processing and talking about all these Indian characters, rare with very few exceptions, and I really appreciate, and I feel like we've come a long way. I don't think there's that same pressure anymore.
No.
I think you can have a book entirely peopled by people of color, and people will read it.
Yeah, and yours was. I mean, that was, to me, reading your collection when I did in 2018, because at that time I had started to send mine around. I had just started and I was just getting rejections. But then I read your collection and I thought, no, there's hope. There's hope. Because
I'm so
and
happy
you went places
about that.
I haven't even gone. I mean, you really pushed the envelope with some of your stories, right? So, yeah, I mean, you went places. You that was bold. So yeah, I'm hugely in awe still. So yeah.
I think we're almost we're like almost at the halfway mark. So what I was thinking was, if it's okay with you, I will read like
Yes,
2 paragraphs from one of my shorter stories, and then if it's okay with our host, I'd love to open it up to the audience being able to talk to Jenny about her collection. Would that be okay? Is she's still on with us, right?
Kim.
That works
Yep.
great
Yeah.
for me.
Is
Yeah.
that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Whatever you guys want to do, this is your hour.
Excellent. So I'm reading from White Dancing Elephants, which was published in October 2018 and was one of Kirkus Review's best books of the year, as well as a finalist for the Penn Robert Bingham Debut Fiction Award. And the paragraphs I'm reading from are actually to honor the children and adults affected by the air quality changes from wildfires in California and just kind of climate change refugees in general and climate change survivors. The story is called Neela Bhopal, 1984, from a climate event, I would say, that occurred much earlier on. And it's from the perspective of a child who works in the clay, these brick kiln or brick making structures. I don't want to just say ovens because they're large enough for people to walk in and out of. So they're not quite just ovens. It's sort of part of the production process of making bricks. But because of the size of them and the nature of the work and the hard nature of the work, a focus for child labor. And during the Bhopal disaster, very tragically, it was laborers, including child laborers, who were marginally housed, who were most immediately and directly affected by the chemical leak. So Neela Bhopal, 1984. You always trusted the forest. Here, danger can be seen and is known. The floor is layered with cool leaves that can be used to cover up faces. You're lying here, laughing and out of breath. Your brothers are lying beside you. The first one to move will be tickled by all the rest, who pretend to be monsters and fake growl with the hunger of thin ghosts. All of you will watch out for the glint of teeth and dazzling predatory coils. The dense brush hides tigers, snakes, and a tiny creek that tastes fresh after the rain. Your youngest brother knows the best places. The edge of the pretend forest, a neglected city garden, is where you and your brothers purchase time by tickling each other or run and scramble over rocks as if the 4 of you never had to work, as if your father never accepted a packet of rupees and 4 quintals of wheat, 1 for each of you, as if he never told you, Neela, go, as if he didn't stop you when you were 9 from holding on to your mother's sari, as if he didn't hold you and your brothers back, including the youngest one, age 5, from nearly tearing the sari off her body when they wouldn't let go. Your hands could be washed of the clay, of the hard coal, and every day your fingers learned to move more quickly than the legs of men who carried finished pyramids, fresh bricks for the furnace. In summer, you and your brothers first broke coal, then walked without bending into the brick kiln, cloth protecting your mouths from the smoke. December was joy and cold, the fumes of the kiln more bearable when you could rinse your mouths with water, which was not so scarce then. And after working, you and your brothers knew that you could leap over everything jagged that you saw. In seconds, you could place many yards between the intimation of a threat, its small or large rustle, and yourself. You could easily outrun strangers' hands and rejoice at the chill, walking outside into the kiln and back, and then sleeping on the ground of the shanty was still better than working in the factory. Then early one morning, coming back with a vessel of water, you spy a pile of bright folded cotton cloths on the ground. And because of the weight you carried, you carefully make your way toward it, even though you want to run. December, your birthday. I'll stop there because I really want to leave a lot of room for us to talk to Jenny about her collection. Thank you so much, all of you, for your presence with us this evening. You know, we didn't end up referring to the pandemic, but that's affected everything too. And again, reiterate, please buy books from our wonderful host. And I'm turning it over to Kim to hopefully moderate some questions from our audience for Jenny. Thank you.
Hi, that was awesome. Both of your stories.
I would just like to say one thing about Chaya's story, because I was really hoping, Chaya, that you would have picked that. I remember when I featured your collection at Pop Matters, that was the story that I was drawn to the most. And the reason is, in 1984, I was a young child living in India, watching the whole Bhopal tragedy unfold. And though I was not old enough to fully understand everything, I was 12 years old, but you could understand in the news and, you know, the faces of the adults around you, and you could see the images in the news. So to me, that story resonated a lot. I had connected with it, and I had featured that story on Pop Matters, and I'm so glad you read that one. I mean, I love a lot of the other stories. I love your title story, Talinda, and other stories, but this one just, it just, you know, it's so I would encourage everybody to go read that story if you can.
Thank you.
So I put questions in the comments because why not? My first question is, both of you, out of all your stories, which was the most emotionally hardest to write? Which was the easiest? Which was the favorite? That kind of thing.
Okay, I'll go. So
you first.
Yeah, no, my favorite to write, I'll say the most fun one. I don't know if I can pick a favorite, but the most fun I had was writing Mango Season. And the reason is that around the time, just before I started writing it, there'd been a lot of these articles about how, you know, certain kind of South Asian writing panders to the white gaze, and they exoticize, you know, things by putting in saris and spices and mangoes and slums. And I thought, well, yes, yes, there is a bit of that in some South Asian fiction, but if you live in South Asia, those are things that are part of your everyday life. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to just really go and do this on the nose thing where I'm going to put all of these tropes actually in a story, but they're not going to be gratuitous. I'm going to try to make them essential to the plot. And so Mango Season was my little subversive response, you know, in a way, to all that criticism. So I went and put everything in there. There's mangoes, there's saris, you know, I mean, the protagonist is a sari shop employee. And he's craving mangoes. And then there's spices and food, and, you know, there's even Bollywood music, and there's slums. And I put it all in there because I thought, well, this is a reality in India. This is how it is, you know, so you can't say this isn't. But again, yes, yeah, there's a way to do it and there's a way to not do it. So that was my most fun. I'll just leave it there. Yeah.
You're making me make a mental resolution to write a story about a snake charmer. The next time, I'm gonna go write that story. But I just want to say, so parenthetically, I just want to alert the audience. Jenny has, if you're all wondering, Bollywood music, don't even know where to start. Jenny has this incredible list up at Large Hearted Boy, and it really is true that there is a Bollywood song for, what did you say, like every mood, every
emotion, every story.
Every story. So I'm really excited about that because I know these songs, but I don't know in the encyclopedic way that other generations have known of, like, in this movie and this guy was singing it and this was the playback singer. But I think for me, on a little different note, the hardest story, but then also in some ways the easiest. I mean, it was like hard, but then the emotions were the easiest to, I think, unravel a little, was Orange Popsicles, which is a story about a young woman who's a foreign student from India at an Ivy League school. And the story came out around when the Kavanaugh hearings were happening, which was pretty interesting. A lot of people said that that aspect resonated. And so it's the story of a campus rape of that foreign student by an extremely entitled and, privileged young man who actually does pretty much get away with it, but then in some ways, importantly, really doesn't either, So I think that the hard part of that story was just living with my character through the horrible traumas I was putting her through. And then the easy or accessible part was holding to her very real, like her determination to not be undone by that trauma, to not be stopped, felt very real to me. And it really, I had seen it in many acquaintances and friends, and in Dr. Blasey Ford's courage and Anita Hill's courage and testifying. So I thought about those women, and I mean, I think it's an important moment for more women of color stories to come out, period. And so I'm really excited about the reception of Jenny's collection this year and mine a few years ago, and hopefully many more, including from people in the audience.
Okay, so one of my other questions, and by the way, anybody watching has a question, put it in the comments and we'll post it to the video. And I added some links in here, like where you can buy both their books. We have them here at the store. Actually, Jenny, yours is a little back ordered because it's selling so well.
I know, my publisher told me that he had to ship another box. He forwarded me the email from SPD and said they're out again. So,
yeah, Ingram was out, so I had trouble getting my hands on it. I think it's due in like this week, next week.
He shipped the whole box, or 500 or something like that. So it should be.
So that's awesome. So anyway, you can. Oh, what else did I put in here? I put in a link to your podcast in here.
Oh, thank you. Yep.
And you know what? Can you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. Yeah. So and Chaya knows, she's been on the in the podcast from day one. So basically, when the pandemic started, a lot of my writer friends, especially the ones of South Asian origin, were very concerned because already selling a book during a pandemic year is difficult enough, but then if you happen to be a writer of color, and you're writing for a very particular community, it's harder to have the airtime and the oxygen in the media. And so I thought, there's not a lot I can do. I'm not a publishing industry person. I'm not a big media person. I can write book reviews. I can, spotlight writers. And I thought, well, why don't I just create a platform where writers, South Asian writers, can come, and they see me in South Asian. So where they can come, they can talk about their book. We can spotlight their book, and they can talk about other books as well. And that's how it started in April. And so now we've been going for quite some time, and we've featured a lot of writers, and it's really writers with new books out, particularly. Once the pandemic hopefully gets to, is done, then I'll go back to featuring other writers as well from previous years. It doesn't have to always be new writers. But right now I felt like the urgency was around just giving voice and giving a platform to new writers, especially debut writers, because they're the ones that don't get the New York Times review and the Washington Post review,
Yeah, I imagine it's very hard to have a book come out right now. You can't go on tours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really
Well, but
sympathize.
the
Yeah.
plus is people are reading more.
Yeah.
People are
Mhm.
definitely reading more. We're all reaching for books, aren't we?
Yeah.
Mhm.
We're reaching for books, and I mean, obviously, people are turning on their Netflix, but Netflix in turn is reaching for books.
Books.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah.
What was the other question I had for you? Oh, I read this great quote. You wrote an article really recently talking about working as a translator.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you,
Poets and writers.
yeah.
Yeah.
And you said, and I love this, we are all translators. The process of reading involves translating and interpreting a writer's meaning and intent. So that is so well put, because I never thought of it before. Like, well, I did think about it, but it was never in one sentence, so nicely put
Yeah.
together. So what's it like to translate?
Yeah, I love doing translation. I've been doing it for a long time, just hadn't started sending my work out for publication till a couple of years ago. So, and that was initially just short stories, but now I have a whole book length of translated works, coming out next month. What I like about translation is that it's really a form of close reading, but you're really immersing yourself, right? So you're reading at the sentence level and really diving deep into what was the writer's intention, because it's not always just translating a word from A to B. You really have to understand what the writer had actually meant and translate the intent and the nuances. And so I like that, because I like that play with language. You're really grappling with language.
Mhm.
And what happens is, a lot of times when I'm translating from, it's an Indian language, Gujarati, into English, and I'm looking for the right English word, it makes me start to think about that English word in a different way. Like, I step back and I have to look at it as if that's the first time I'm encountering it. And what are all the different meanings of this word? What are the possible meanings? And so I find that it's actually, in some way, being a translator helps me be a better fiction writer, right? Because you're really questioning word choices and understanding the nuances. So when I sit down to write my own fiction or nonfiction, I'm questioning, is this the right word? You really become very good at doing that. Sometimes maybe a bit too much, but yeah.
So we have an ESL book club, English Learners Book Club, here at the store.
Oh.
And last year, I got one of the best questions, and I still think about it. Woman from China, she was listening to the radio, and she heard the song, I Just Want to Dance with You. And then there was another song that came on that said, it was, I want to dance with you. But the meanings were totally different. One was, I don't care who I dance with, but I need to dance with somebody. And then the other one was the same exact phrase, but it was like, I specifically want to dance with you. And how two different songs have the same phrase, but they were totally different. Yeah.
Yeah. And isn't it great when we find that kind of texture and difference?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I just think it's great.
I want to dance with somebody. Whitney Houston. That's what it was.
Yes. One of the greats.
Yeah. So yeah, I find your translations, I mean, just absolutely fascinating. How did you guys meet? How did you meet?
I think it was the Pop Matters, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? You outreached me about the Pop Matters thing. Did I outreach you? I don't even know. I think you outreached me.
So yeah, I was a book reviewer at Pop Matters. And I was focused on, anytime there was a short story collection, my editor would just send it to me. Hey, Jenny, another
yes.
And so I remember that year there were two, yours and Anita Felicelli's.
Yes.
Love songs.
And Anita's another wonderful writer and a good friend, actually.
Right.
Strongly recommend Love Songs for a Lost Continent. Sorry, Jenny.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no, that's the title, Love Songs from a Lost Continent. And so what had happened was, that year there had been about 4 or 5 brand new short story collections from writers of South Asian origin. There was Akhil Kumarasamy, there was Neil Patel, and I did forget there was one more, and then Chaya and Anita. And so basically I was doing a feature where I was for one of my monthly columns, and that's how Chaya and I connected, because she had this collection. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, just reviewing her book, and yeah.
Talking about books, I put several in the comments that you guys had brought up, and it's some great reading lists here. What are you all reading now?
Great.
Chaya,
Oh, you want me to go first?
Yeah.
I just read Real Life by Brandon Taylor, and it was amazing. I thought it was amazing, and I'm not surprised that it was shortlisted for the Booker, because just when you feel like you've gotten a hold on it as campus novel or Black gay novel, or some sort of label, there's something that completely changes your preconceptions about whatever way you would have wanted to categorize it. It's really, it's voice driven in the best possible way. It's deeply honest about the ways in which our families can tear us apart and disappoint us, but also how we still grieve any kind of loss, because the character Wallace loses his father as one of the key events in the book early on, so I'm not giving anything away. And then there's there was this one chapter, I was sort of live tweeting while I was reading it, and I was writing a review of it, I should say, and there was this one chapter that's really Faulknerian in the best sense, where you really get inside Wallace's consciousness as he tries to explain himself to someone from a very different background. And when I read that, I actually posted, I think Brandon could win it. I really think he could win it. So that's the last thing I read that resonated that way. What about you, Jenny?
Yeah, so I'm actually teaching an online workshop, and we have 2 texts for the workshop. I've read both of them before, but I'm sort of rereading them for the workshop because we've got a little bit each week that we're rereading. And one is Toni Morrison's Jazz.
Oh, I love her.
Oh, and that novel is such a masterpiece because of what she does with the structure, right? She's kind of doing a jazz improvisation with how she structured the narrative. And so I love that. I mean, every time I revisit it, I learn something, right? And so that's one. And then the other one, the craft book that we're using for the class, is Ursula K. Le Guin's Steering the Craft. And that one, it's interesting because Ursula K. Le Guin is, for somebody who's this kind of sci-fi fantasy writer, her craft advice is so grounded, it's so real, it's so practical, and it's just very specific, and she's no nonsense, and she has all these exercises. She gives great examples from other texts, and so it's been a great kind of conversation starter for us in the class. So those are the 2 books that I've been rereading for the workshop.
Stephen King has a really good writing craft book.
Yes, on writing. I love that book. Yeah, that's a great book.
We sell that. They assign that in schools here, so I always keep it in stock.
Right.
I'm adding the books you just mentioned to the comments. Okay, so what are you guys working on now? You don't have to be working on anything. It's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on, it's more like what I can't say yet. So I'm working on some stuff, and hopefully you'll hear about it soon. Okay. There you go. Okay. What about you, Jenny?
Yeah, I can say this much. I can say that I have a translation book coming out next month. So that's also a short story collection. It is actually coming out with HarperCollins India, but they have global rights. So I think they're going to do something in the US. I'm not sure about the commercial stuff yet, but they did take the global rights for that. And initially it was going to be out in December, but I think they're just seeing all the publicity for this book, and they're like, let's piggyback onto And so it's like, okay, I'm just going to go straight from one promotion cycle
The other.
It's
into the
excellent.
next.
That's exhausting.
Yeah,
That's great.
so that's in the works. That's already, I mean, the editing, obviously, it's all ready to go. And then I am working on a novel, and I can say this much because I put it on my website, which is it's transnational, so it's set across India and the US and everything. It's got a bit of magical realism in it. Yeah, because I mean, I have that even in my collection because a lot of my stories are influenced by Indian folklore, and a lot of Indian folklore has magical realism in it. It's just like taken for normal. Like you could have my mom used to tell us these stories, and she would be talking and telling us a story, and suddenly there's a ghost, and she would just like, and then the ghost walked in, and you'd be like, wait, what? What? And then the ghost just walked in, and they did this
Very
or that.
gothic. I love it.
Yeah, and it's just taken. It's like a normal thing. It's just normal for ghosts to be
Tuesday.
walking around.
It's a Tuesday before the ghost walked in.
Yeah, it's normal for them to come in and chat with you, and when you're cooking or cleaning, So I had to make sure I had some magical realism.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. I love that. Okay, guys, we're about it. This was so much fun. You guys are awesome. Like truly impressive women. I'm so happy you came onto our channel because I just enjoyed this.
Excellent.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Kim.
you.
Thank you. The crap out of your books.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny, and congratulations again on your collection. Can we say the name and hold up the cover of her book again so people see it?
I still have my ARC copy.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Each of us
Mine are coming in this week because they're selling that well.
Oh, excellent. I know. I'm so sorry. Yeah, but I still have
okay.
my copy. So yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
Well, good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Chaya. Thanks.